You might have come across some of my free patterns by mood videos where I show which patterns are my personal favorites from their wide range of sewing patterns. Now it's one thing looking at the technical drawing of these beautiful designs, but wouldn't it be good to see them sewn in a video with some semi-detailed instructions? Well, I thought so too, so I chose the jacket of the Trillium Ensemble, the JAMESIA Pants, which my subscribers actually voted for, and the Sylvan Tank to create an entire outfit from just free sewing patterns. Mood does have written instructions on all of their patterns as well, just in case you didn't know. The fabric I chose to make the Trillium jacket and the JAMESIA Pants are these IKEA curtains that my friend gave to me as she no longer needed them. These curtains are absolutely massive, so I've got a ton of fabric to work with, and they almost feel a little bit like denim, so they are perfect for the jacket and pants. Starting with the Trillium jacket, I of course printed and assembled my individual pattern pieces and then traced them onto the fabric, making sure I pay attention to the amount of pieces needed and whether it's caught on the fold or not. The first thing to sew are the pocket flaps, which are just stitched right sides together and then folded outwards. For the rest of the pocket, I overlocked the edges, but a zigzag stitch would do as well, and then I transferred the pleat line from the pattern onto the pocket piece. Folding from the inside to the outside, I pinned my pleats in place and secured them with a couple of stitches. I also pressed the pocket so they would look nice and neat. When pressing the pocket, I also folded all four sides of the pocket over by about 1 centimeter and pressed those edges down. The top edge I also stitched down to basically hem it, as this will be the opening of the pocket. I also pressed the pocket flap, and whilst pressing it, I just made sure that the raw edges of the top side are folded inside. These two pieces can then be added to the front pieces simply by top stitching them on. I then moved on to the back piece, where I also need to add a pleat. I once again followed the markings on the pattern, but this time folded from the outside to the inside and stitched that pleat in place. The back piece should now match the yoke in width, and we can sandwich it between both yoke pieces and sew along the entire width of the back. To encase the raw edge of the back piece between the two yoke pieces, I also top stitched the seam I just created. Now it was time to close the shoulder seam. I sewed them together and overlocked the raw edges. I then also closed the side seam with the same process, first sewing it shut on my sewing machine and then overlocking the edges with my overlocker. That was the time I had to create the placket at the front. Using the pattern, I marked the placket onto my jacket and used an iron to fold the placket to the inside of the jacket, and also folding that raw edge inside the placket itself. This can then be top stitched, and I loved how neat this came out. The same process needed to be done for the bottom hem, which is a massive hem, but I honestly love how big it is. I did iron and top stitch it in place, and the jacket really came together at this stage. To create the sleeves, I sewed both sleeve pieces together and overlocked the raw edge, and then also decided to top stitch that seam from the outside for it to lay nice and flat. I closed the sleeve and was very happy to see that everything aligned really well at this stage. Somehow this DIY was the tidiest thing I've ever sewn. The pattern for the cuff actually had to be cut on the fold, which the pattern didn't suggest, so I did cut it out twice to rectify that. I sewed the cuffs by closing the side of the cuff, folding it right sides out and then sewing it right sides together along the sleeve opening. After that, I folded the raw edge over and folded the cuff in half to then top stitch the cuff closed. This was extremely fiddly and definitely the most challenging part of this pattern. I then attached the sleeves to my vest, sewing them right sides together. Unfortunately, my sleeves did not match up with the depth of my armholes, so I did have to adjust that, which in the end resulted in the fabric being pulled slightly, which I personally don't mind too much. The collar also didn't match my jacket, so I did have to cut that out twice too and make it longer overall. I attached it by just folding it around my neckline and top stitching it. And that's the Trillium jacket done. The final reveal will be at the end of the video. For the JAMESIA pants, I once again of course printed and assembled my patterns and traced them onto the curtains to then cut them out. First thing I did is marking the darts and sewing them into each leg panel. For the pants, I overlocked each pattern piece individually rather than overlocking the edges once they are constructed. I then inserted the zipper, which I did by marking the length of the zipper onto my pattern and sewing it shut with the longest stitch setting on my machine, but continuing the seam with a smaller stitch length after the marking for the zipper. I ironed that seam flat and then just stitched the zipper to the seam allowance to then take out the long stitches to expose the zipper. This way I was able to make sure it perfectly aligns before sewing closer to the zipper teeth. I could then move on to close the side seams of the pants as well as the crotch seams. Next I closed the inner leg seams and I was ready for my first try on. Unfortunately, the pants were really big on me and the overall shape was not very flattering. I also didn't like how low the waist was. So I took the sides of the leg panels in, which also meant I had to redo the zipper, which I was very unhappy about because I hate fitting zippers. I also decided to add a waistband to make the waist longer overall and just changed up the waist facing for this. I added that to the pants and incorporated the zipper into the waistband. I finished the waistband by sewing the second layer right sides together onto the waistband and lastly just hemmed the bottom of the pants and they were done too. I'll show the final outcome with all the other pieces together at the end of the video. The last item I chose for this free patterns outfit is the Sylvan Tank, which I actually cropped from the original length suggested by Mood. The fabric I used are some velvet scraps I had from making DIY flares. This fabric is stretchy, which is important, and I made sure to pay attention to the direction of stretch. I cut out all my pattern pieces, which already was much more fun since the pieces were small, which at this stage was a nice change. I started by closing the shoulder and side seam. For the neck and armhole binding, I sewed them into a loop and folded them in half to then evenly attach to the neckline and armholes. I sewed the entire Sylvan with my overlocker, which I always love doing. For the hem there was no binding included in the pattern, however I decided to finish the hem with a binding anyway and therefore cut 2 more strips of fabric, sewed them into one loop and also attached them to the top. The first time around I sewed along the right side of the fabric, so I had to start again, and once I attached it right sides together, the Sylvan Tank was done. And here is the final outfit. My absolute favorite piece is definitely the Trillium jacket. I love the style and it was surprisingly easy to sew. The JAMESIA pants I do like too. However, I did not like the original fitting of them, but for a pair of wide leg pants, they are a good starting point. The Sylvan Tank was such a quick and easy make, which I am always a fan of. I love the fit of it and will definitely be using this pattern over and over. I hope you enjoyed this video. If there are any patterns you would like me to test, feel free to leave a comment below. And other than that, thank you so much for watching.